Good morning, Captain Retired Matt Edwards here with the next observation post weekly report. Well, it's a bit early, it's Tuesday, so it's not exactly weekly. But I looked at how many items I had and I decided it was too much for Thursday. So, here goes. SCONDVA ACVA. Now that's the Senate Committee on National Defense and Veterans Affairs, or the Ancien Combattant Veterans Affairs. Sometimes there are reports that, things like that the government puts out. Well, in one of them, I didn't look up exactly which one, but I think it was the 2003 one. They said that the non-public property SISIP, if there's too much money in there, the money belongs to the soldiers. But if there was too much money in the Treasury Board supported plan, the SISIP policy 901-102, then the money would belong to Treasury Board. Now that is utter bullshit. The reason being is that Treasury Board can't own any of the property, any of the money in the SISIP plan because of National Defense Act Section 41.3 and Financial Administration Act Section 7.1 brackets 2. 7.1 brackets 2 says that once money is put into a plan established by Treasury Board, then the Financial Administration Act no longer applies. Now, how can Treasury Board own the money in Treasury Board supported plans if the law says that it doesn't own it? Now, are Canada pension plan contributions, are their employees public servants? Oh, by the way, I was a bit late starting because I was playing a game and I decided to wait till 10:30 instead of doing it at 10 Newfoundland Standard Time. Now, I said, are CPP employees public servants because the CPP is a fully funded by the contributor plan. Now, the government gets away with something here, as far as I'm concerned, because the public servants are still part of the public service, and they're paid out of the CPP funds, not the taxes that people pay. Some people would say that that doesn't matter, but, the thing is that I like things to be exactly right. As an example, I saw that the board and lodgings people pay when they're in the barracks, that comes out of the person's pay. The people that work on the base are paid from that and not by the government. Okay, so anyway, I said most would say yes, but they work for CPP administering a self-funded benefit. Okay, I put down a note to self or a reminder. Who is the critic for the CPP, for the NDP and / conservatives? Liberals are in power, so I didn't mention them. And the bloc is mostly about Quebec and stuff, so I didn't mention them. I said I'm going to analyze my CRA tax filing reminder letter. Now, I keep saying I'll do it, but I haven't. The way the government has set up the system right now is that they have taxes they want to apply to everything, and they want to have tax credits that will apply to give you a break on things that they decide to give you a break on. That seems to be the way that they're doing it. For example, to help the aged people, when you have no money coming in when you retire, they have a age credit that's over $7,000 right now in 2022. So that gives you a break because that's the way laws work. When you pass one law, it often adversely affects some, and it affects some people in a better way. Now, why I thought about that is I was thinking about the government making the earnings loss benefit taxable in 2006. A lot of people would say, well, you're getting income, you have to pay taxes. But according to the new Veterans Charter, or the Veterans Wellbeing Act, in law, the income replacement benefit is compensation. Now, compensation is not the same as income. Compensation is to make you whole. It's a capital payment meant to make you whole. So they shouldn't be trying to tax capital as income. SISIP cut Corporal Retired Tom Anderson off in 2016 for having income, and this is absurd, first of all, but they seem to have forgot that work is very important, and that they ought not to have clawed back all of the alleged debt at once, as this would leave him at a very bad financial position. When I was a tax collector, and I spoke to Tom about this recently, I was not allowed to take every cent of a person's money. Usually I tried to keep it to about 30% because they had current year taxes out, they had bills to pay, so you can't make someone go bankrupt. Tom was only getting SISIP and a pension, and this was after the class action that he was part of. They, said that he owed money from the 2014 tax year because he had done declared income, and then they cut him off until they recovered the amount of money. Now, in a perfect world, they would go to court, prove the debt exists. After they proved that the debt exists, they could then go ahead and collect on the debt. But they just stopped paying him until they got the money that they said he owed. Now, that's insane. It shouldn't be happening this way. If that was the way that people could do everything, everybody'd say that you owe me money and then collect on it. Now, the thing is that they hold the payments that they're going to pay you. So when they say you owe money, they have the upper hand because they can withhold payment against your will. On a similar note, SISIP makes up 83.33% of the income replacement benefit, and VAC stated in 2019 that a disabled veteran can earn $20,000 a year while in rehab. I'll do up some analysis about this complicated mess. It's complicated because they never thought about it. Now, when they did the town hall, I think I asked, or someone asked, where did they get this $20,000 arbitrary figure? And they said they called around to the various provinces, and they saw that $20,000 was the best across all the provinces, so they decided to use that. Now, that makes them sound reasonable because they check to see how others do it and then use the one that allowed the most allowable earnings. But you had to think about the Pension Act. How was the Pension Act? How did it treat allowable earnings? Well, in 1916, in order to make sure that people didn't become lazy, they decided to underfund the pension and to allow people to work without clawback after service. If they were disabled, they were allowed to work to the best of their abilities, and there was no clawbacks for allowable earnings. But the government in 2019 changed the formula. It wasn't that there was no allowable earnings. The allowable earnings formula at the time, before 2018, was the same as the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, Policy 901-102. If you're in a rehabilitation program, you are allowed to keep half of your insurance, and they would claw back half. But if you weren't in a rehab program, then they claw back 100%. So they want to keep an eye on you. They allow you to keep half if you're in a rehab program and they're spying on you. But when you're outside the rehabilitation program, then you're not allowed to make a cent, or they deduct it dollar from dollar from your long-term disability insurance. Now, at the time, I'd had to verify this to make sure, but I'm pretty sure that Tom was in a rehabilitation program for Veterans Affairs Canada for the earnings loss benefit. So they shouldn't have been allowed to take into account 100% of the income he had as a stevedore for Marine Atlantic. He only worked a couple months a year just to keep busy and to, be sociable. He didn't need to work, but he did. Now, they shouldn't be penalizing people and discouraging disabled people from entering the labor market, because that's what they're doing with a clawback for earnings. CRA taxes SISIP long-term disability as they see it as insurance, but a 1997 Canadian Forces report called Caring for the Ill and Injured said that the view of SISIP was insurance was a myth. You can't have it both ways, Canada. The Canadian Forces report rules out taxation under Income Tax Act, Section 6(1)(f). Now, the reason I say that is that if they, in an official report, even if they're wrong, they say we only think SISIP is insurance. Well, that means that if you want to tax it as insurance under the Canada Revenue Agency, well, the Canadian Forces is another branch of the government, and they ought not to have put it into an official report if they want to claim it as income under the Income Tax Act as insurance. Then you can't say in the Canadian Forces report that it's not insurance, then everybody is wrong. That's a very good idea, a very good example of gaslighting. When you tell people something that's true is not true, you say everybody's wrong. You said that this is a report. You're supposed to believe the government, so the government should have more credibility than any one person. So when the government said that the insurance that we get, if you're on the long-term disability known as SISIP, is not insurance, they have a lot of clout, a lot of influence. Well, we can use that stupidity that absurdity in the law against them. Because if they say they want to tax it as insurance under the Income Tax Act, then why did they say it wasn't insurance? You know, they should have competent people making these reports. Now, I said, should we? And by the way, I'm spouting all this stuff off, but I'm reading it from the post I made to my observation post report. Okay? So I call it a weekly report. I jot down ideas on a piece of paper, scraps of paper, or whatever. And then I compile them all, post them, and then I read them aloud to try to make a documentary record. One of these days, we'll have to keep these people accountable for all the harm that they're doing to us. I said, should we seek a court declaration that the SISIP policy 901-102 is not a fringe benefit of employment? Now, this is kind of a sneak attack. It's not much of a sneak attack because I'm telling you about it. If they're monitoring, they might see that if I went to court and I asked for a declaration that the service income support insurance plan is not a fringe benefit paid over and above our T4 reported salary, they might say, well, who cares? Well, I'd say it's important. You should know what are your core benefits that are part of your contract or whatever, and what are the things that are frivolous, trivial, over and above your pay, like that are part of the fringe benefits, like a car allowance or a housing allowance or a long-term disability program premium. So if they want to claim it as a fringe benefit, they'd have to prove that it's paid over and above our normal reported salary. Now, if I got the court to declare it, I put down some reasons. A, the 1997 Canadian Forces report mentioned above. So we would ask the court to say it's not a fringe benefit in insurance, a group insurance policy, based on the fact that the government said in 1997 that it wasn't an insurance policy in a Canadian Forces report. So that would be evidence to support the declaration I'd be asking for, or someone else could ask for. B, Canadian Forces members are not employees. Now, people might say, what's the difference, Matt? An employee has a contract of employment. It could be an individual contract where you negotiate with your employer individually and you get the best deal that you can hammer out. It could be a collective agreement if you have a union, and the union negotiates with the employer on your behalf, and it results in a collective agreement, a contract that binds all members of the group, and you don't get a choice whether or not you want to accept that agreement. All you can do is quit if the union signs a deal that you don't like. Now, Canadian Forces members, under two different acts that I can name offhand, the Employment Equity Act and the Canadian Human Rights Act, they are deemed to be employees along with the RCMP members. Now, if they were truly employees already, the government would not have had to deem those people as employees in these acts. You wouldn't have to deem someone when they are already an employee. Well, that goes back to Section 61F, which is part of Section 6 in the Income Tax Act, which is about fringe benefits of employment. Can a Canadian Forces member have fringe benefits of employment when they are not legally an employee? Now, C, all parts of the deal between an employer and an employee are considered before arriving at a negotiated deal. Now that I got from the Borelli, Ontario Court of Appeal, 1973 case. So the portion of the long-term disability premium is already included in the T4 reported income, making the insurance not a fringe benefit paid over and on top of reported wages. Now, some people might think, that's pretty wordy, Matt. Why don't you make it simpler? I don't want to leave them any wiggle room. I don't want them to squirm out of the allegations, the statements that I make. So what it would do, if we obtained a court declaration that SISIP policy 901-102, Sun Life policy 12,500G, the Great West Life policy for the RCMP, and the Public Service Management Insurance Plan, if there were a court declaration saying that these were not fringe benefits, that would rule out taxation under Part 6 of the Income Tax Act. So it would be a backdoor way to achieve long-term disability that's tax-free. Which, trivial fact, or trivia, whatever you want to call it. In 1997, according to the Hansard that I obtained, only 25% of the long-term disability insurance policies in Canada are taxed. 75% are tax-free. Prior to 1971, when they changed Income Tax Act Section 6, and they put Section 61F into the Income Tax Act, 100% of long-term disability insurance was tax-free. Now let me tell you why that's fair. Life insurance, and by implication long-term disability insurance, because it's exactly like life insurance except that you're still alive instead of dying. Life insurance is not taxed. Insurance is not income. Long-term disability insurance is not income. You don't have to serve an employer to get it. You pay premiums beforehand, and if the risk happens, you get it. That is not income. You're getting money in relation to a contract of insurance, and the risk happened, and it's not coming from the employer. It's not that you had to serve the employer. They don't control your hours of work. They don't instruct you or whatever. So it isn't income. Now, forgery. Now, this is a fairly big one. Forgery. Does affixing your name to an official tax document meant to deceive CRA make the one who does it guilty of the crime of forgery? Maybe. To play it safe, the one who examines the possible action should take these facts into account. A. Income Tax Bulletin 428, paragraph 23 says that no T4A is required for a long-term disability insurance, meaning that they will be safer by not issuing any T4A than issuing one that is proven to be false. B. There is a payroll accounting industry, and what an administrative service insurance only policy does is very similar. So they ought to put the name of the actual payer on the T4A if one has to issue one as required in law. And I put in quotes my references because a lot of people might think I'm stating opinions. The Université de Laval Federal Court of Appeal 2002 case, and the National Bank of Canada Federal Court of Appeal 2003 case. The Toronto Transit Commission Federal Court of Appeal 2010 case. Now, D. Income Tax Act Section 153(1) requires an employer to issue a T4 slip, and I got that from Sparrow Electric versus Royal Bank of Canada, 1997, Supreme Court of Canada. Now, but the alleged insurer is certainly not employing disabled people. Now, in the Act, it says any person who makes a payment. In that case, they said that person meant employer. That's what they said. They interpreted it. So if they've already interpreted Section 1531 of the income tax to mean person meant employer, it's not up to them to interpret once again. The Supreme Court of Canada has already determined interpretation. So they're full of shit. Now, E. The CPP irrevocable consent form adds another layer of forgery as the company administering, but not underwriting, the long-term disability policy, issues a form to Canada Pension Plan saying that they are to receive the retroactive Canada Pension Plan disability when either the government or the contributor must receive the Crown debt. Okay, so they get us to sign a form. They only administer but do not underwrite the policy. Now, when an underwriter issues some of these forms, well, I mean, they should have the right to do it if anybody, because they were the one who took the risk of profit or loss by having an insurance. But Sun Life, Manulife, Great West Life, and Industrial Alliance, they're the four administrative service only administrators for the four federal government plans, they take no risk of losing money. The government underwrites these four policies. So if the government underwrites these four policies and you're going to assign a government form to have money diverted from the disabled contributor to somebody else, you cannot say it goes to the administrator who didn't take any risk. It would have to go to either the person who, like me, who was approved for the Canada Pension Plan, I contributed to it and I should get it, or the actual person who underwrote the policy and took the risk because insurance is not certain. They could lose their shirt. So anybody who underwrites the policy, if this is legal, they should get the money. But the money goes to the administrator. Now, I can think of two things. One, these insurance companies that put their name on it, they give a credit or they send the money back to the actual underwriter, which would mean that everything I said doesn't matter. Or two, that they give a credit towards the plan and then the underwriter doesn't have to put as much money in to keep the plan afloat. That's the two things that I can think of here. Or they might take the money and run. They could easily say, look, the Act says that an administrator is the one that's due this money. The government wrote the law. The government sent it to the administrator. So we're not doing anything illegal. We're doing it to the letter of the law. Well, to that I say, go fuck yourself. CRA claims that it can charge people for obeying the letter of the law, but disobeying the spirit of the Income Tax Act. Now, I don't exactly know what the Income Tax Act spirit is. It's a very complex and technical law. It is adjusted annually. They change it annually, unlike many laws. The thing is, if you do that, you say that you're going to prosecute people for obeying the letter of the law, then prosecute all these insurance companies who said they didn't do anything wrong, they obeyed the letter of the law. Let's look at the purpose and intent, the spirit and intent of the Canada Pension Plan Act. It is supposed to supplement the person, the contributor, their money after retirement. If you send the money directly to an insurance company, are you meeting the spirit and intent of the Canada Pension Plan Act? Definitely not. Absolutely, definitely not. Anyway, I'm getting tired of, I don't know if I'm going through too fast. I want to have a show on Thursday. Anyway, I'll call it off after this one, because I don't want to be here all day. Nobody does. I'm not getting paid for it. I'm trying to do something to alert people, to educate people, to tell them don't accept everything the government says at face value. I would say the government's doing a lot of things right. The only things that I notice and I complain about is when I find that they're doing something stupid, wrong, illegal, immoral, or something like that. So even if most laws are fair, not all laws are fair. I'll leave the last point with this one, and it's about me personally. In order to get my Public Service Superannuation Act pension, because I used to work for Canada Revenue Agency, I used to work first, I started out, to give you a little bit of history about myself, I used to be with Indian and Northern Affairs. I used to teach in a town called Webequie in Ontario. After they declared that the local band was going to take over the teaching of their kids, which is nothing wrong with it. Teaching is usually, education is part of the provincial system, usually. They said to the 6 or 7 teachers that were there, federal employees, you can take 6 months pay or you can take another job. I took the job. So they retrained me as a customs inspector. So I went to Rigaud, Quebec, and I did a 13-week course to become a PM1. That's the classification, program administration, PM1 customs inspector. I was supposed to go to work with Thunder Bay, north of around Thunder Bay, because that's where the closest big town city to where I was in Webequie, Ontario. But along the way, the superintendent there never got the people that he wanted, because I came in, parachuted in as a priority. So he arranged to get me back to Newfoundland. I got back to Gander, which was a bonus. So after I ended up back in Newfoundland, I didn't expect that. Well, then I got transferred again to St. John's as a CRA tax collector, because they were doing some cutbacks in customs and they declared me surplus once again. Now, the thing is, after I became disabled, I put into for a Public Service Superannuation Act pension, because I was contributing to that, and it's like the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension. Now, unlike the Canadian Forces pension, the Public Service Superannuation Act pension has Health Canada adjudicate the file exactly like Canada Pension Plan has their own people, nurses. Now, I'm curious about that. I have a curiosity, and I say curiosity kills the cat, unfortunately. I wonder how many people the Health Canada people say are disabled, but they don't meet the definition, because the definition under the Public Service Superannuation Act is very similar, almost a carbon copy of the Canada Pension Plan disability one. Now, the Reserve Force Pension Plan has a similar definition, and I had a lot of trouble getting my Reserve Force Pension Plan. I applied 6 months previous to when I got out of the military. They told me I had to get the Canada Pension Plan disability first. Now, I've strayed into a minefield by talking about that, because it makes me upset a bit. Okay, they said, listen, you got to get the Canada Pension Plan disability, or we can't give you your Reserve Force Pension Plan. I don't think I cursed that time, but if I was talking to them now, I'd say, what the fuck is wrong with you? I contributed to this pension. I bought back my time. Before 2007, we had to elect to buy back our time. So I joined the military in 1999. I had to pay for 8 years. It cost me $4,300 to get it, and you're telling me I can't get my pension when I got kicked out of the military because I was too disabled to serve under release item 3B. Are you fucking insane? But I probably wasn't as angry or cursing at him at that time. But I did say, you know, the medical release process isn't that I just asked to get out medically. I said, I go to the doctor on a periodic health exam. When I go to the doctor under Canadian Forces Administration Orders 26 whatever, and I go to see every 5 years under 40, every 2 years over 40. When I went to the doctor, they saw that my medical cat, my med cat, was too in excess of the minimum for to be a logistics officer. So you had to have a 3, that's the number they assign it, and they assign me a 4 or a 5 in the occupational or another column. Now, because the doctor assigns you a certification that is other than what is required to continue serving, that triggers what's called, in the old days, CRBM, Career Review Board Medical, or under the new terminology, unless they change it again, an Army Review Medical Evaluation Limitation Board. So the doctor that sees you, his results, the preliminary results, are taken and examined by a board of 3 other Canadian Forces doctors. They can then choose to continue, say, keep you without restrictions, keep you with limitations, or release under Queen's Regulations Orders 1501, 3A, or 3B. Now, in my case, they decided to release me 3B. That wasn't within my power to change. This was forced on me. My career was ended by these doctors. I said to Canadian Forces people in the, administering the Reserve Force Pension Plan, so you want me to go to a civilian doctor and get a certification under the Canada Pension Plan disability, despite the fact that government doctors had already looked at my file many times about that very same thing. Yep, and they wouldn't change their mind. Now, I was getting so frustrated with that, I sent them a copy of my Health Canada report, I sent them a copy of my disability tax certificate, and I might have sent them a copy of something else. The thing I was trying to say to them is that you guys should be operating on similar rules as other programs. So I still never got very far with someone, but I had a 2 or 3 hour call with some policy guy. And along the way, during that conversation, he said, oh, I see that you got a Public Service Superannuation Act pension approved by Health Canada. Well, that has a very similar definition to the Canada Pension Plan disability that we're telling you to go get. So I'm going to approve your Reserve Force Pension Plan. Now, all well and good. I was happy. I got what I wanted. But it never helped me in the least. Because the Reserve Force Pension Plan is being clawed back, or it was when I was on SISIP, they were clawing it back. All that fighting I had with the government about getting my pension didn't do me any good. All it did was cause another fuss. But in the long run, because pensions are non-indemnity and contributory, the Canada Pension Plan is non-indemnity and contributory because the Supreme Court ruled it in 2002 in the Sarvanis case. you can't take into account to reduce your payment by using a non-indemnity and contributory payment. So the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act is non-indemnity and contributory. I know that because I compared it to the RCMP Superannuation Act, and there was a case a year before Dennis Manu started his class action called SOLTS, Sierra Uniform Lima Zulu, British Columbia Court of Appeal, 2006. In that case, a RCMP member had been harassed mercilessly. She sued the province of BC, not the federal government, because they had hired the RCMP. She wasn't allowed to legally sue the RCMP because it's a federal organization. So she sued the RCMP's contractor, the province of British Columbia. She won. She got $950,000 in damages. The only thing they took off, because she had 5 different things. She had the Pension Act under the Pension Act. She had the RCMP Superannuation Act under that act. She had the Great West Life Insurance under, the government set up long-term disability plans, and that's the RCMP's one. And she also had the Canada Pension Plan Disability. Now, when they were looking at all those things, at the lower court, the British Columbia Supreme Court, they didn't allow the province of BC to take into account Canada Pension Plan. They didn't allow the province of BC to take the Great West Life policy into account because of the Bradburn rule. But the only issue, and they did allow the Pension Act to be deducted. So the only issue to be put on trial in the Court of Appeal was, could they take into account the RCMP Superannuation Act? That would reduce money that the province of BC would have to pay as damages to make her whole. Now, they shouldn't have had to go to court. There have been many, many cases that said pensions are non-indemnity and contributory, and therefore you can't reduce damages to make someone whole by some of their savings, their property, what they have accrued, the rights that they have accrued and they're going to get anyway. Now, that has important implications here. Veterans Affairs takes into account the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, even though the common law, you aren't allowed to take into account a non-indemnity and contributory payment. So by law, not statutory law, because they passed a law that say they could do it under the Veterans Wellbeing Act regulations, but the common law that's made by judges, you cannot take into account what you own to save the person who hurt you money. See, it's not allowed to be like that. So the thing is, like I said, I'm going to save half of this for Thursday. The thing is here, but I'll leave you with a teaser. Here is the problem. They have set up a system where they hide away behind what is said to be an insurer. But Sun Life does not underwrite policy 12,500G. Manulife does not underwrite policy 901-102. The RCMP Great West Life policy, it was Her Majesty the Queen that got sued, not Great West Life. So the government wants us to think, because it's in writing, it actually states in the policy that Manulife is the insurer. Well, if CRA didn't accept that in the National Bank of Canada, and I posted pictures of that on the I try to make things a bit more interesting by putting pictures to explain where I get my conclusions. So paragraph 5 of the National Bank of Canada. I'll read it off to you and then I'll sign off soon. In this case, a number of the above noted indica are present. Like the contract between Université Laval and Assurance Vie Desjardins, the contract between the respondent and Financière Manuvie is an ASO contract, i.e. for administrative services only, and not an insurance contract in the normal sense of the term. In other words, Financière Manuvie did not act as an insurer, but merely as the administrator of the respondent's group insurance policy. Financière Manuvie only represents the respondent, which is in no way relieved of its obligations as the employer. See the applicant's record, page 42, the definition of an ASL contract, administrative service only. Carrying on the paragraph 6. In addition, the group insurance plan is entirely funded by the respondent, and it bears the cost and financial risk of the plan. Now, that's what I've been saying. He who pays is the underwriter, has to take the risk of profit or loss. Legal proceedings must be brought against the employer, not against Manulife. I'm not going to butcher that French no more. Manulife. Lastly, the respondent and Ms. Messier-Lafleur were bound and governed by the employment contract during the period of disability. Now, that's not like our policy, because the SISIP policy, you had to be terminated from service in the military. Paragraph 7. Despite all these indica, the respondent, which is the bank, nonetheless relies on 2 points that distinguish the Université Laval decision from this case. See, if you have a case that's done before, that's a precedent. In order to go forward with something new, you had to show some kind of difference. So they tried to show that they had a different case than the Université de Laval. It submits that, unlike the situation in Université Laval, Manulife, and not the respondent, determines eligibility for the benefits, and Manulife pays the wage loss benefits to the employee. The respondent therefore concludes that the benefits were not paid by the employer, but by the insurer. Paragraph 8 gives the judge's ratio decidendi, the reasoning behind the ruling. We are unable to agree with the respondent's submission that the benefits are paid by the insurer because, as already noted, Manulife did not act as the insurer in this case, but as the administrator for the employer's plan. Moreover, the fact that the checks were issued by Manulife in its role as administrator of the respondent's group insurance plan does not in any way change financial reality. The amounts representing the benefits paid to the claimant were paid by the employer, in this case, the respondent. The payments were accordingly paid by the respondent through... Anyway, my point is that the physical payment doesn't matter. CRA did not accept National Bank's submission, and they took them to task. The issue at trial was about employment insurance premiums. It wasn't about tax. It was about employment insurance premiums. They were saying that the source of the payment was the employer, and therefore the employer needed to take employment insurance premiums because the payments were coming from the employer. They were going to the employee, and according to the Employment Insurance Act, you have to deduct premiums. Now, let me tell you why that decision of the court was wrong. The employer made the payment, not Manulife, but the employer made the payment as insurer, so it wasn't making a payment for present service. It was making a payment in relation to a contract of employment, a contract of insurance that it sold its former employees. So when the person served with their employer, they bought an insurance policy from their employer, and after they became disabled and were no longer able to serve, they then got the insurance that they paid for. Now, on a technical note, the judge is correct. The payment did come from the former employer, but it wasn't for current service. It wasn't income from employment. It was insurance paid in relation to the fact that someone bought an insurance policy. So you can't say that it was right that CRA won and that the employer had to pay these EI premiums in the future because the payment was coming from the employer. Therefore, technically, the Employment Insurance Act covered this, and they had to take out money, which cost the employer money. See? What they should have said is, look, okay, in order to get the employment insurance that you want us to take premiums for, a person must be ready, willing, and able to work. Tell me something. Is the person that we're talking about, they're getting long-term disability, their former employer is National Bank of Canada, are they able to work? Well, the answer is no. If the answer is that they're getting long-term disability payments insurance because they are unable to work, then you don't need to take employment insurance premiums out. Why would you pay into a plan, the employment insurance plan, when you can't collect employment insurance? It's flat out ridiculous, okay? The government wants to get a windfall by collecting employment insurance premiums, and since 2013 and Bill C-13, 2011 and Bill C-13, they want tax CPP and EI to be deducted from administrative services only policies when the employer is the underwriter. It wants a technicality to apply, and it wants the employer to pay all of these contributions towards the government programs. The problem is that costs the employer money. So if an employer is required to take out CPP, they had to put 100% with whatever they deduct from the employee who's given them service. So if they took $10 out for CPP, they'd have to put another $10 with it and remit $20 to CRA. Employment insurance is 140%. So if they took $10 out for employment insurance, they'd have to put another $14 with it, and they'd have to remit $24 to CRA. That's an expensive proposition for them, because it's not like they have a productive employee who they get benefit from, the person working. This is someone who's on long-term disability, so that's nothing but an expense for them. So CRA's decision, who went to court to take this to court, to achieve this, is not based on reality, because the person's not working, the person cannot work, and they only want the money because of a technical legality, that the money's coming from the former employer. So you can't convince me that that's fair. What they ought to be doing is looking at, well, what should we be doing here? What is the spirit and intent of the Employment Insurance Act? What is the spirit and intent of the Canada Pension Plan Act? What is the purpose of this group long-term disability policy? What is the spirit and intent of the Income Tax Act? So the thing is that they want all of these windfalls, because to the government, they're getting a windfall by doing this. Now the problem is, at least from my viewpoint, is that they want special rules for the government. Because while I just said that the employer shouldn't be taken to task, CRA did, and they won in court, so that is the current law. What they ought to be doing is not doing it at all, because insurance is not income. Insurance can never be income, because there is a principle of insurance that you can never achieve a profit from insurance. It's called the compensation principle. So if you lose $100,000 and you have insurance, they had to cover you up to 100, but you're not allowed to make any more than the 100 when they repay you. The Income Tax Act is designed to tax profit. So there is a philosophical reason why you can't tax insurance, and that's because it's not income. Insurance is insurance. That's simple. See, that's the problem we're having, and I'll leave this as my final point for that. That's the problem with the income replacement benefit. It is a form of insurance. They called it the earnings loss benefit first, but it's insurance. Then they changed the name to the income replacement benefit. It's still insurance, and insurance is not income. In fact, the wage loss replacement plan, that is how CRA refers to it in the Income Tax Bulletin 428. They say that we don't care about what you call it, we care about what it does. So we will refer in this Income Tax Bulletin to all such plans as wage loss replacement plans. Now that was written in 1979, and there have been cases since then that show that that Income Tax Bulletin is out to lunch on many things. They talk about an indemnity for your loss of wages. But wages cannot be insured. You can't get indemnified for your lost wages because, I mean, that's crazy. If you get hurt in an accident and then you sue the person who hurt you, they don't pay you for your lost wages. They pay you for your injury that affects how much you can earn. That's why it's called earning capacity. So you lose the capacity to earn, which is a capital item, and the reference is Jennings, 1966, Supreme Court of Canada. And because they harmed you in a capital way, then you had to get repaid in the same form, capital. Now, if you correctly identify the payment under the earnings loss or income replacement benefit as the sum of capital, that would rule out taxation under the Income Tax Act because they call it income, you see. If you're going to get a sum of money that is income, then you can certainly apply the Income Tax Act rules about income to that sum of income. But if you get a sum of capital, because your body is capital, and if your body gets hurt, you get repaid in kind. Now, you want to tax that, you have to not label it income. You have to use the capital taxation rules, because Canada has 5 different ways to tax people. Income from employment, income from an office of employment, which soldiers have, income from business, which is profit only. You know, you don't take their gross revenue into account, you take their net revenue after expenses into account, you tax them on that. Then income from property and income from capital. Insurance is none of those. So the government in 1971 decided to tax long-term disability payments because they said that it was related to employment because the employer paid part of the contribution, the premium. Well, I got to shut up soon because I'm getting into what I want to talk about on Thursday, because I got this stuff into my points about Thursday. But the thing is, and again, this is a teaser, I guess, you want to say that the government paid 85% of the SISIP premiums. Prove it. Show me. I know you took it off our checks. Look at the payment on the stub this month or that month, and you can see that you took off X number of dollars for my part of the premium. Prove to me that the government matched my 15% with their 85%. And then prove to me it got sent to a third-party insurance company, because if you are self-insuring, that throws the whole deal out. The only way that this operates correctly is when you have 3 parties. You have an actual underwriter, a former employee, and a former employer. When you have 3 parties, there's no conflict of interest present because each party will look after themselves. But if, like in the Manouche case, the judge said, why would Manulife disagree with its commercial partner? Now, why did the judge say that? Well, because it was an administrative service only policy and Manulife was getting paid like an employee gets paid by the employer. Manulife was getting paid to administer the policy for the government of Canada. Now, that makes the government and Manulife one legal party. Agent principal is how you describe it. Okay, so the government is the principal, Manulife is the agent, and they form one legal party. The former Canadian Forces member, the veteran, they are the other party. Now, in any dispute where you have 2 parties, you're going to take your own side of the dispute. Right? So what they're doing is creating the appearance of a 3-party system when there's only 2 legal parties. That's going to get them in trouble eventually. For one thing, one of the things that I'm cluing into these days is that thing I said about forgery. Sun Life sends in a form to me. They say to me, sign this irrevocable consent form, send it to CRA, and then they're going to get my Canada pension plan. Well, do you underwrite my policy? They would say yes. Then I'd say, well, how do you underwrite a policy when the previous 2 cases about federal government long-term disability insurance had the Butte State RCMP case, Her Majesty the Queen was sued, and in the SISIP long-term disability insurance, Dennis Manouche sued Her Majesty the Queen. So would you like to reconsider your answer when you say that you underwrite the policy? Then I'd say, if I was the one prosecuting these fuckers, are you aware of the National Bank of Canada Federal Court of Appeal case in 2003 and the University of Laval Federal Court of Appeal case in 2002? Are you aware of those precedents where they said that administrative service only policies when the payment is actually made by the insurer, you know, like yourselves, but the actual payment, the real payment, came from the employer and it was made through a financial intermediary like yourself? And in the settlement of the dispute for the Manouche case, didn't the government say that it will make the respondent or the defendant, they said, will make the payment to the class through manually in this page on this paragraph? So despite the fact that the government took National Bank of Canada, they took the Toronto Transit Commission case, and they took the University of Laval, they took all these companies to court, these employers to court, but they don't want to take themselves to court. See, that's what detracts from our trust in democracy. You set up the rules. You have to follow them. Should the rule be there is another question. I say the rule shouldn't be there. But my opinion doesn't seem to matter. It's funny because they think they're going to be liable for the EI and the CPP. But if I'm right, they don't have any liability to worry about because the former employee doesn't have a current employee working for him. So the long-term disability payments, you have to ask the question, what is this payment being paid in relation to? If the payment is paid in relation to former or present service, that's going to be income. No questions asked. That has to be income. If the payment is being made because you bought an insurance policy, you paid the premiums, and you get a payment because you are now covered by this contract, you're not getting income. You're getting insurance because you bought insurance. See? Now, someone hurt you walking down the street. You get hit by a car. The driver's at fault. You sue the driver. They have to pay your damages because you were perfectly fine before you got hurt, and now you could be in a wheelchair. So they have to look at your career and estimate, extrapolate what kind of career you would have had, and a judge determines how much money the person who hurt you has to pay. Now, the government doesn't want a judge ruling over every time a veteran becomes disabled, so they set up an administrative system known as Veterans Affairs Canada. See? So the payment under the Pension Act is insurance. The payment under the new Veterans Charter, whether it's income replacement benefit, disability award, whatever you want to call it, that's insurance. All of these payments are types of insurance. The thing is it indemnity, which means it's compensating you for your loss? Or is it non-indemnity, which it's not compensating you, it's being paid merely because there's a formula that says if you have the risk happen, this is what you get. When you have to go and look at someone's career and extrapolate what they're going to make, that's never going to be a non-indemnity payment because you have to delve into the person's life and make a pretty accurate or as best guess that you can, because nothing is certain, but you try to make the best estimate you can about what kind of career the person would have had. But if you get 75 or 90% of your old pay, that's pretty simple to figure out. That's a non-indemnity payment. Okay? The Pension Act doesn't look at your salary at all. It looks at your body. It's an indemnity insurance. I actually found a Hansard reference from 1975 that said that it was an indemnity insurance. But they don't look at it that way because they look at it and see how much you lost. They compare it to the workers' comp, whatever. Anyway, listen, that's long enough. I think I'm going to get back to having a game and whatever. And I was a little bit delayed. I'll try to stick to a schedule. But just for curiosity, you can send a message to me or whatever later. I wonder if doing this at a later time will give us more viewers and create more of a stink for the government, because that's what I'm trying to do. I can't fix these things by myself, but if we create conversations, if we create questions, if we make them squirm, if we say to them, what makes you think that you can take the SISIP policy into account when you forgot to put it into the Veterans Wellbeing Act regulations as a clawback? So you, the government, Her Majesty the Queen, you save money from a disabled and service veteran because they have bought their own insurance when they served, and they paid for it. You can try to say that the government paid most of it, 85%. But the question there is, who earned it? When the risk happens, does the money get paid to the government because it paid 85% of the premiums? Or does the money get paid to the individual who earned the contribution when the government makes it? See? I mean, I'm not trying to pull a fast one. I'm not trying to use legal technicalities. I'm trying to say, break out the common sense, people. Look at what really happens. Because if you look at what technically happens, you have a situation with these cases I just read about. You have people arguing that because the payment was technically made by Manulife, they paid it. Well, they certainly did pay it physically, but it's because you set up a fraudulent system, you bastards. What are you trying to confuse us for? Why don't you make the payment directly? That's a good question. Anyway, I was about to say have a good weekend, but I'll see you on Thursday. Thanks for watching.